Topic: The Inventions That Disappeared. It was a crisp spring evening in Grove City, Ohio in March of 1998. Stanley Meyer walked into a Cracker Barrel restaurant off Interstate 270, just south of Columbus. He was meeting two Belgian investors who had flown in to see his invention, a device he claimed could run a car on nothing but water. Over coffee and pie, Meyer's demeanor was, by all accounts, confident. He had been here before. He had shown the dune buggy to local news crews, had shaken hands with investors from Europe and the Middle East, had even secured a patent from the United States Patent Office. But as the meal progressed, something changed. Witnesses later said Meyer suddenly clutched his head, his face turning pale. He managed to stand, then collapsed. By the time parameters arrived, he was dead. The coroner would rule it a cerebral aneurysm. There was no autopsy. And in the years that followed, that death, and the invention that died with him, would become one of the most persistent conspiracy theories in modern history. But the real story, the one buried beneath the mystery, is far more complicated than assassination or suppression. It is a story about patents, physics, and the desperate human need to believe that somewhere out there, a perfect solution is being hidden from us. Stanley Meyer was not a crackpot in a garage. He was a former NASA engineer, a man who had worked on fuel cell technology for the space program. He grew up in Ohio, a self-taught inventor with a legitimate engineering background. In the 1970s, he began filing patents for hydrogen generation devices. Not the water car, but industrial tools for welding and cutting. One of those early patents, number 3913 of 320, filed in 1975, was for something he called a water fuel cell. On paper, it described a method of splitting water into hydrogen and O, oxygen using far less energy than conventional electrolysis. He claimed the secret was resonant frequency, a way of vibrating the water molecules so that the bonds between hydrogen and oxygen would break with almost no input energy. The Patent Office granted the patent. That is an important detail, because many people assume a patent means the invention works. It does not. The U.S. Patent Office does not test inventions. It only checks that the idea is novel, non-obvious, and sufficiently described. A patent is a legal document, not a scientific validation. But to the public and to investors, a patent looked like proof. By 1990, Meyer had built a dune buggy. He invited a local news station, WBNS 10 TV, to film a demonstration. The footage shows Meyer pouring water from a garden hose into a reservoir on the buggy. He then starts the engine and the buggy drives around a parking lot. The reporter on camera says the car runs on water, and the segment goes viral. By 1990 standards. Within weeks, Meyer is fielding calls from investors around the world. He forms a company, the Water Fuel Cell Corporation, and begins selling licenses to use his technology. The price tens of thousands of dollars per license. He promises that the water car will end our dependence on oil, and people believe him, but not everyone. Independent engineers begin asking questions. They want to see the device's internal workings. Meyer refuses, citing proprietary secrets. He only shows the buggy from the outside. He never lets anyone inspect the engine bay. In 1996, the bubble burst. A group of investors who had paid Meyer for a license filed a lawsuit in the Ohio Court of Common Pleas. The case, Meyer via. Investors was not a criminal fraud trial. It was a civil suit to recover money. But the testimony that came out was devastating. Expert witnesses, including physicists and engineers from Ohio State University, testified that Meyer's device violated the first law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created. I'm nothing. They argued that the water fuel cell, if it worked as claimed, would produce more energy than it consumed. A perpetual motion machine. Under cross-examination, former employees of Meyer admitted that the dune buggy demonstration was staged. They said the buggy had a hidden battery pack and a separate hydrogen tank, that the water was just a prop. The judge ruled against Meyer, ordering him to repay $25,000 to the investors. The patent was effectively voided in practice, though the Patent Office never formally revoked it. The court declared the invention a fraud. Now, if the story ended there, it would be a simple tale of a con artist exposed. But then came the death and the disappearance. In 1998, Stanley Meyer died. The timing, just after meeting with Belgian investors, was suspicious. The lack of an autopsy was suspicious. And then, in the early 2000s, his original patent files and the prototype of the water fuel cell were reported stolen from a locked storage facility in Ohio. The police investigated, but no suspects were ever identified. The prototype simply vanished. And that is where the conspiracy theory takes hold. The narrative goes like this. Meyer had a working device that could have ended the oil industry. Big Oil, or the government, or the car manufacturers had him killed. They stole his prototype to suppress the technology. The lack of autopsy proves a cover-up. The stolen files prove a conspiracy. It is a compelling story. It has been told in documentaries, on YouTube, in books. It taps into a deep distrust of institutions, oil companies, patent offices, courts, and governments. But is it true? Let's look at the evidence first, the death. The coroner's report from Franklin County, Ohio, lists the cause of death as a cerebral aneurysm. No autopsy was performed because the coroner determined the cause was natural. Was that a mistake? Possibly. But there is no evidence of foul play. No witnesses who saw someone tamper with his food. No toxicology reports showing poison. No motive that can be tied to a specific corporation. The "they poisoned me" quote, which conspiracy theorists repeat, comes from a single witness who claimed Meyer said that before collapsing. That witness was an investor who stood to lose money if Meyer's invention was fake. The quote is uncorroborated. Second, the stolen prototype. Who benefits from stealing a device that the courts have already ruled a fraud? If the device was real, the company that owned it would have a strong incentive to keep it safe. If the device was fake, the inventor's estate might want it to disappear to avoid further scrutiny. But the theft also benefits conspiracy theorists. It creates a mystery that can never be resolved. Without the prototype, no one can definitively prove it was a scam. And that ambiguity is the fuel that keeps the story alive. But let's go deeper. In 1997, a year before Meyer's death, a team of independent engineers from the Journal of Electrochemical Society attempted to replicate Meyer's device using the exact specification from his patent. They built the resonant electrolysis cell, tuned the frequency, measured the energy input and output. The result, the device consumed more energy than it produced. It was in fact less efficient than standard electrolysis. The patent, while legally valid, did not contain enough detail to make the device work. That is a common pattern in fraudulent patents. The inventor leaves out the critical step, the secret source, done so that no one can replicate it. But if the device was real, why would Meyer omit the key detail? Because if he revealed it, he would lose control. If he didn't reveal it, no one could prove it was fake. It's a perfect catch-22. Now, let's branch out. This is not an isolated story. In 2023, a Japanese inventor named Yoshihiro Nakamatsu, better known as Dr. Nakamatsu, claimed to have built a water engine. He demonstrated it on Japanese television, pouring water into a tank, and the engine ran. The media went wild. The government sent officials to investigate. Within weeks, the device was exposed as a fraud. The water tank was connected to a hidden propane line. The inventor was arrested. And what happened to the prototype? It disappeared. It was stolen from a police evidence locker. The same story, the same arc, the same disappearance. This pattern repeats across cultures. In 2018, a farmer in India claimed to have built a water-powered tractor. The story went viral. Government officials visited. The device was later found to contain hidden propane tanks. The prototype, it was lost in a fire. The pattern is so consistent that it suggests a universal human psychology rather than a global conspiracy. We want to believe in the water car. We want to believe that somewhere a genius inventor has cracked the code and that the evil oil companies are keeping it from us. It is a myth that fulfills a deep emotional need. The hope that technology can solve our problems without sacrifice. But let's go further back. The water car is just one chapter in a long history of free energy claims. In 1901, Nikola Tesla built Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island, intending to transmit wireless power. The project ran out of money, and the tower was demolished in 1917. Conspiracy theorists claim Tesla's technology was suppressed by J.P. Morgan, who funded the project and then pulled the plug. The truth is more mundane. Tesla's design was not physically feasible. with the materials of the time. In 1989, two chemists at the University of Utah announced they had achieved cold fusion, nuclear fusion at room temperature. The media exploded. The government funded replication attempts. Every single attempt failed. The chemists were disgraced. But to this day, a small community of believers insists that cold fusion was real and suppressed. Each of these stories follows the same arc. Charismatic inventor, initial excitement, scientific rejection, and conspiracy narrative. The water car is not an exception, it is the rule. So where does that leave Stanley Meyer? Was he a fraud or a visionary? The evidence strongly points to fraud. The court ruling, the failed replication attempts, the hidden battery pack, all of it suggests that Meyer was a con artist who knew exactly what he was doing. But that does not mean he was a simple villain. He was a man who had worked at NASA, who had legitimate patents in hydrogen generation, who had seen the potential of fuel cells. He may have started with a genuine idea and then, when he could not make it work, decided to fake it. He may have convinced himself that the end justified the means. He may have believed that if he could just get enough funding, he could eventually make it work. That is a common story in the world of invention. The line between visionary and fraud is often blurry, and it is crossed one small deception at a time. But the deeper question is not about Stanley Meyer, it is about us. Why do we keep retelling these stories? Why do we want to believe that the water car was real, that Tesla's death ray was suppressed, that cold fusion was hidden? I think it is because... So these stories give us a sense of control. The world is complex. Climate change, energy dependence, pollution, these are hard problems with no easy solutions. The water car offers a fantasy. What if the solution already exists and it is simple, and it is being hidden by evil forces? That fantasy is more comforting than the reality that solving these problems will require sacrifice, innovation, and time. The conspiracy theory gives us an enemy to blame. Big oil, the government, the patent office. It is easier to believe in a cabal of villains than to accept that the world is messy and that we have to do the hard work ourselves. And that brings us to the final layer. The real mystery is not whether Meyer's device worked. The real mystery is why we need the story to be true. Because the story itself, the inventor, the demonstration, the court case, the death, the disappearance, is a kind of machine. It is a narrative engine that runs on ambiguity. Every missing piece of evidence, every unanswered question becomes fuel for the next retelling. The stolen prototype is not a problem for the conspiracy theory. It is its greatest asset. Because as long as the prototype is missing, no one can prove it was fake. And as long as no one can prove it was fake, the story can live forever. So let me leave you with this. The next time you hear a story about a suppressed invention, ask yourself not whether it is true, but why you want it to be true. What need does it fulfill? What fear does it address? Because the answer to that question tells you more about yourself than it does about the invention. And maybe, just maybe, that is the real invention that disappeared. The ability to look at a mystery and say, I don't know, and be okay with that.